My name is Rina Joy D. Pascua.
Hello everyone, my name is Marvy Evardo.
Hi everyone, I am Christine P. Olarde and we are BSTM 3-1. Hi guys, so in this vlog, we're gonna talk about the Pride and Prejudice of Jane Austen. Pride and Prejudice is the story of human souls, which is easily and gracefully told by the famous English writer Jane Austen. Having stood at the last of the several epochs, this novel remains one of the best in the world literatures. Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice centers on the conflict between marrying for love and marrying for economic reason. So none of Mr. Bennet's 5 daughters can inherit his estates, so they are pressured to finding security in good marriages. Elizabeth Bennet, the main character, struggles with societal pressure of marriage and resists Mr. Darcy's advances and proposal. Eventually, however, she finds that she does love him, and for that reason, she decided to marry him. So talk about the summary of the novel Pride and Prejudice. So let's go.
The summary of Pride and Prejudice. Pride and Prejudice is set in rural England in the early 19th century, and it follows the Bennet family, which includes 5 very different sisters. Mrs. Bennet is anxious to see all her daughters married, especially as the modest family estate is to be inherited by William Collins when Mr. Bennet dies. At a ball, the wealthy and newly arrived Charles Bingley takes an immediate interest in the eldest Bennet daughter, the beautiful and shy Jane. The encounter between his friend Darcy and Elizabeth is less cordial. Although Austen shows them intrigued by each other, she reverses the convention of first impressions, pride of rank and fortune and prejudice, against the social inferiority of Elizabeth's family hold Darcy's aloof, while Elizabeth is equally fired both by the pride of self-respect and by prejudice against Darcy's snobbery. The pompous Collins subsequently arrives, hoping to marry one of the Bennet sisters. Elizabeth, however, refuses his offer of marriage, and he instead becomes engaged to her friend Charlotte Lucas. During this time, Elizabeth encounters the charming George Wickham, a military officer. There is a mutual attraction between the two, and he informs her that Darcy has denied him his inheritance. After Bingley abruptly departs for London, Elizabeth's dislike of Darcy increases, as she becomes convinced that he is discouraging Bingley's relationship with Jane. Darcy, however, has grown increasingly fond of Elizabeth, admiring her intelligence and vitality. While visiting the now married Charlotte, Elizabeth sees Darcy, who professes his love for her and proposes. A surprised Elizabeth refuses his offer, and when Darcy demands an explanation, she accuses him of breaking up Jane and Bingley. Darcy subsequently writes Elizabeth a letter in which he explains that he separated the couple largely because he did not believe Jane returned Bingley's affection. He also discloses that Wickham, after squandering his inheritance, tried to marry Darcy's then 15-year-old sister in an attempt to gain possession of her fortune. With these revelations, Elizabeth begins to see Darcy in a new light. Shortly thereafter, the youngest Bennet sister Lydia elopes with Wickham. The news is met with great alarm by Elizabeth, since the scandalous affair, which is unlikely to end in marriage, could ruin the reputation of the other Bennet sisters. When she tells Darcy, he persuades Wickham to marry Lydia, offering him money. Despite Darcy's attempt to keep his intervention a secret, Elizabeth learns of his actions. At the encouragement of Darcy, Bingley subsequently returns, and he and Jane become engaged. Finally, Darcy proposes again to Elizabeth, who this time accepts.
Hi everyone. I'm going to share you a short biography of Jane Austen. In her early life, Jane Austen was a great woman, novelist of the early 19th century. Jane was born on December 16, 1775, in Steventon Rectory. She was the second daughter of the Reverend George Austen and his wife Cassandra. Apart from her older sister, also called Cassandra, Jane also had 6 brothers. In 1783, Jane and her sister were sent to boarding school. While at school, they both caught a fever, and Jane nearly died. Jane Austen left school in 1786. Even as a child, Jane Austen loved writing, and she wrote a lot of short stories called the Juvenilia. About 1795, she wrote a novel called Eleanor and Marian. In the years 1796 to 1797, Jane Austen wrote another novel called First Impressions. It was later published as Pride and Prejudice. Then in 1798 to 1799, Jane wrote a novel named Susan. It was published posthumously as Northanger Abbey in 1817. In 1801, Jane Austen moved with her sister and parents to Bath. Jane Austen was a tall, slim woman. In 1802, she received a proposal of marriage from a man named Harris Bigwater. At first, Jane accepted, but she quickly changed her mind. Jane Austen never married. Her father, George Austen, died in 1805. In 1807, Jane Austen moved to Southampton. She lived there until 1809. At that time, Southampton was a flourishing port and town with a population of over 8,000. However, in 1809, Jane Austen moved to the little village of Chawton in Northamptonshire. That's all. Thank you for listening about the short biography of Jane Austen. Thank you.
Select one major issue in the novel and explain its social, historical, political, and economic context. Relate the major issue theme in the novel to contemporary social issues. The one major issue in Pride and Prejudice is love. Pride and Prejudice contains one of the most cherished love stories in England literature. The courtship between Darcy and Elizabeth. As in any good love story, the lovers must elude and overcome numerous stumbling blocks, beginning with the tensions caused by the lovers' own personal qualities. Elizabeth's pride makes her misjudge Darcy on the basis of a poor first impression, while Darcy's prejudice against Elizabeth's poor social standing blinds him, for a time, to her many virtues. Of course, one could also say that Elizabeth is guilty of prejudice and Darcy of the pride, and title cuts both ways. Austen, meanwhile, poses countless smaller obstacles to the realization of the love between Elizabeth and Darcy, including Lady Catherine's attempt to control her nephew, Miss Bingley's snobbery, Mr. Bennet's idiocy, and Wickham's deceit. In each case, anxieties about social connections or the desire for better social connections interfere with the workings of love. Darcy and Elizabeth's realization of a mutual and tender love seems to imply that Austen views love as something independent of these social forces, as something that can be captured if only an individual is able to escape the warping effects of a hierarchical society. Austen does sound some more realist, or one could say cynical, notes about love, using the character of Charlotte Lucas, who marries the buffoon Mr. Collins for his money, to demonstrate that the heart does not always dictate marriage. Yet, with her central characters, Austen suggests that true love is a force separate from society and one that can conquer even the most difficult of circumstances.
To the question, why is Pride and Prejudice a must read? What is its significance to you personally? To answer, Jane Austen Pride and Prejudice is a classic story, and classic stories are usually considered somewhat uncontemporary and rather difficult to approach for modern readers. However, such generalization might be misleading since Pride and Prejudice can be a delightful experience for any readers. Here are a few reasons why Pride and Prejudice should be an unconventional classic that is enjoyable for everyone. Austen's witty and intelligent writings is full of irony, wicked humor, and mockery. The story is regarded as love story while being so unromantic. There will be no Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet kind of love Austen's page because the match between characters is often emphasized on money. They would make one either attractive or unattractive before the consideration of their characters. So before any incident of love at first sight, people carry around their price tag while browsing around those of others. Love in her feminine views is a cynical matter rather than an emotional driven one. However, the story is still so personal and its scope so confined to the circle of characters that by the end of the story, readers feel like they knew all the characters personally. And though we do not walk, talk, and dance like those 19th century Victorian England, we are all prone to these characters' failings, such as pride or prejudices. We cannot help but feel deeply attached to the story and its seemingly trivial love stories because we are also guilty of such weaknesses in characters. Austen's love story is the archetype for modern love stories that we are exposed through various media channels. It is both a Cinderella story where the main lovable character is saved from the poverty by the rich Prince Charming, and it's also the exemplary case of ironic between love and two opposite persons who are bound to loathe each other at the very beginning. There has to be a reason why opposite characters attract, and Jane Austen has chosen her opposite dynamic as well as they have every reason to hate each other. Austen chooses Pride and Prejudice and make a battlefield full of shame and humor out of them, just to reunite them in the end with the most romantic proposal of marriage. Pride and Prejudice are like Austen's personal letter to love, to her characters and to the readers, as it's intimate, as it's humorously mean. For those who read this novel, it's like sharing all the bad-mouthing with one of the best authors in English literature. And there should not be anything more inviting than the invitation Pride and Prejudice dispatches. So that would be all about the novel of our one of the best English writer, Jane Austen, The Pride and Prejudice. So I hope there are some lessons that you learned in the story, and thank you for watching. Bye!
It's been 12 days, I think I'm